trotting ways. He was here in studio last week, but today he's halfway around the world in Tbilisi, in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Hi, Max.
Good morning, Terry.
And what are you doing in Georgia?
Well, it's the annual Food, Wine and Culture of Georgia tour that I lead. So we have everybody arriving in the next, today and yesterday, and they're heading off for 10 days to explore this amazing country.
And what kind of places will you get to, Max?
Oh, you name it. We're going into mountains, we're going to monasteries, we're going to meet monks that have been making wine for 1,000 years, we're going to see some of the agricultural land, we're going to see some of the ancient castles and fights, and learn all sorts of bits and pieces about the Caucasus.
Georgia is an undiscovered wonder, isn't it?
Well, it is by North Americans, but it's incredible that every time I come here, which is a lot of times, I would say tourism is doubling every year. I can see so many tour groups here now. It's Western Europeans mostly, but it's really picking up fast.
What's your hotel?
So.
I was going to say,
it's lovely.
You're at the Betsy Hotel, is it?
Yeah, actually I know Betsy. Betsy Haskell moved to Georgia for some strange reason in about 1990. Her husband used to be a U.S. congressman, and she moved here in 1990 and built this hotel, which at the time was really the only hotel worth staying in. And over the last 20 some odd years, it's grown. She sold it to another American, and they've expanded. It now has probably about 80 rooms and beautifully placed overlooking the city, and it's just a very fine hotel.
From where have your travelers come to join you then?
We've got Australians, Winnipeggers, from New Brunswick, and the UK, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when I asked you yesterday what's on your mind these days, one thing that you said I found quite striking. You said bowing to terrorism. What did you mean by that?
Well, in the 2 or 3, or in the month or so run up to this program, we had 2 cancellations from people who said, well, I can't do it because there are too many terrorist attacks. And because Georgia itself is extremely peaceful, there's no sign of terrorism here, but it struck me as an interesting reflection of how many people have become almost scared of their own shadows when it comes to international travel these days. We know from the U.S. carriers particularly that international routes are down 15, even 20% on some. And I think it's very unfortunate that so many people seem to be figuring terrorism into their travel plans.
Another thing you said you wanted to talk about was how great Turkish Airlines is.
Oh, yes, give them a plug. Turkish is an incredible carrier. I flew from Chicago to Istanbul with Turkish. They fly out of Toronto and Montreal as well. And it really is terrific when you get on non-North American carriers. Now, Air Canada's got it a lot better over the last several years, but I spent quite a lot of time on U.S. carriers, but some of the Middle Eastern, the Gulf, the Asian carriers, their levels of service are really things we've forgotten about in the West. And Turkish, a big member of the Star Alliance, is a very large airline and serves the world through Istanbul as one of my favorites.
You're also thinking about airline lounges and whether they're worth it or not.
Well, when you hit any of these hub airports, and when we go traveling from Winnipeg into Europe nowadays, we tend to have a North American hub and then a European hub. And access to airport lounges can be the difference between almost a nightmare, because sometimes the hubs look like refugee camps. There are tens of thousands of people, it seems, hanging around, milling around. You can't find a seat. But the airports have lounges that are kept for the airline's priority passengers, but there are also many of them that have public access, either by paying an amount, and that varies from lounge to lounge for individual access, or by joining a system like Priority Pass that gives you access to, 600 or 700 lounges, including, by the way, the Plaza Lounge in Winnipeg.
Oh, really?
Which is very good.
Didn't even know we had one. Okay.
Yeah, and it's relatively new, but it's a great facility. And you buy it for different amounts of money depending on how many entries you want, but it can be about $300 for a year. And for people who are traveling around either frequently or even people who just got 2 or 3 trips but long layovers, considering buying the priority pass system or buying into it is a really good idea.
But what's so great about what you find in these lounges?
Peace, quiet, an internet broadband system usually that you're not trying to share with 10,000 people, not to mention a drink, something to eat, magazines.
Right.
But peace, that's what it is. It's just stepping away from the madding crowd for a few minutes.
Now, to conclude, I understand you're thinking these days about the Queen Mary for some reason.
Well, that, of course, is the other option. But, flying is great if you're at the front of the bus. We talked last week a little bit about the more accessible business class fares. But for most, sitting in the back, you are at 32H. The indignity of the security, the indignity of many of the people who work at airports, the sheer nightmare of travel that it can be. If you have the time, crossing the Atlantic by ship is a wonderful option. You lose about 6 days, that I will grant you. But it's a tremendously peaceful, simple, secure, and rather pleasant way. And of course, within Canada, traveling by train, you can show up 10 minutes before it leaves. You have food, you have wonderful view, many people to talk to, and you get to the destination usually within a 24-hour period. Of targeted arrival. Well, they're not always terribly accurate in their timekeeping.
What does it cost, Max?
Yeah,
but if you have the time, what does it cost to cruise across the Atlantic?
It starts per person in an inside cabin starts at about $900, and that's passage, food and lodging for 7 days. A balcony would probably start at about $1,400, $1,300. Well worth considering.
Sounds great. And so how much longer? You said you're going to be in Tbilisi, what, 10 days, is that right?
Yeah,
in Georgia.
Or in Georgia for 10 days, yeah. And then moving on to other peculiar places.
I'm amazed at how good quality the telephone service is, Max. Quite often when we're phoning you in these remote places, there's always a big delay, but things are absolutely crackerjack out of Georgia this morning.
It's symptomatic of the country.
Yes.
It's a great place and it's a good day.
Max, is it true that they offer incentives to travelers to come to Georgia, like the government will give you a voucher or something? I've heard that.
Not that I know of. Last year when we came in, it was quite curious because every passenger coming through immigration that was a visitor was given half a bottle of wine. And all of the immigration booths were stacked up with cases of wine. It's quite an interesting welcome to the country. But I haven't seen the vouchers for.
All right. Max, thanks for this. Where will you be next week? Oh, you'll be still there.
I'm going to be somewhere in Georgia, but I'm not quite sure where.
Okay. Look forward to it, Max. Thanks. Bye. Max Johnson, founder of the Great Canadian Travel Company of Winnipeg and a principal in the firm called TTJ Tourism. You can follow him on Twitter at Max Globetrotter or check out his blog, maxglobetrotter.com. Now here's Sarah Penton.
Winnipeg police looking for a suspect after 3 people were stabbed during a party last night on Magnus. Everybody is in stable condition. Also, there was a house fire on Manitoba Avenue around 3 o'clock this morning. And don't forget, world's largest truck convoy gets underway, starts off at Oak Bluff at 11 o'clock this morning. They go counterclockwise around the perimeter, so definitely causes some traffic delays this morning.
Coming up in the next hour, where were you on 9/11 15 years ago to tomorrow? And how were you changed by it? How was the world changed by it? Winnipeg international terror expert Dr. Peter St. John deconstructs our post-9/11 world. Chef Karen Peters has been cooking with apples. I can hardly wait. Fresh Manitoba apples. Joanne Kelly's been furiously speed reading. She has 3 tremendous books to talk about. And how Father Brian Kolodechuk of Winnipeg elevated Mother Teresa to sainthood. 17 years, 35,000 pages of documents, 113 witnesses. He wraps up that story. I'm Terry McLeod. You're with the Weekend Morning Show on September the 10th.
Who rules the hibachi? Hot dogs or hamburgers?
What did rapper Snoop Dogg do to get Burger King employees excited about the company's recent hot dog launch? Garrett?
He did the countdown to the launch as only Snoop Dogg can do it. A 3Z, a 2 Lizzie, a 1 Lizzie, and then he just drop a hot dog.
It's a sizzling new season of The Debaters with Steve Patterson. It's this afternoon at 1:32 in Newfoundland and on demand at cbc.ca/thedebaters. Later today, it's science, technology, and a whole lot more with Bob McDonald and Quirks and Quarks.
Today we start our new season with Scientists in the Field. Summer is when scientists do their research around the world, so today we'll travel to Bangladesh, climb Canada's tallest trees, and visit a forest after the fire.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm Marcia Young. The United States and Russia have reached a deal to pause the fighting in Syria. The agreement could lead to joint airstrikes against ISIS and bring some relief to the millions of people who are directly affected by the 5-year-old conflict. But as Dominic Velitis reports, there are no guarantees the guns will fall silent.
The deal, which was brokered after a 13-hour negotiating session in Geneva, will start with a nationwide ceasefire at sundown on Monday. Under the terms of the agreement, the Syrian government will end combat missions in specific areas currently held by opposition forces. They will, though, be permitted to take action against ISIS under certain circumstances. If the truce holds for a week, the United States and Russia will then begin a new military partnership targeting the more extreme jihadist groups, including ISIS. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry this morning hailed the breakthrough deal, which aims to put Syria's peace process back on track.
Today, the United States and Russia are announcing a plan which we hope will reduce violence, ease suffering, and resume movement towards a negotiated peace and a political transition in Syria.
Of course, for the plan to work, regime and opposition forces have to comply with next week's ceasefire. The opposition has already indicated it was prepared to do so, providing the Syrian government did the same. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who helped broker the deal, said Damascus had already been informed and was ready to fulfill the terms of the agreement. Dominic Velitis, CBC News, London.
An RCMP officer in Vancouver has been arrested. A vigilante pedophile hunting group allegedly caught the officer in a sting. Now that officer has been suspended. But the RCMP say this type of vigilante justice is not helpful and actually damages investigations. We get the story from Stephanie Mercier.
The story started a few days ago when a group called Surrey Creep Catchers claimed it had trapped a Mountie who had been trying to meet a 14-year-old girl.
How are you?
The group streamed live video of the alleged meeting on Wednesday. It shows a man standing around. The videographer approaches him and calls him an officer, then says he's from Surrey Creep Catchers. The man runs.
Where are you going? Where are you going?
The RCMP has now confirmed it is investigating and has arrested a Mountie. Assistant Commissioner Brenda Butterworth-Carr.
The member in question has been removed from duty status and is suspended. His status will continually be assessed throughout the course of the investigation.
The RCMP has not released the officer's name as charges are still pending, but says Creep Catchers got the wrong name and put it out on social media. Inspector Tyler Svensson says that's part of the problem with these kinds of groups.
Investigations involving groups like these are very difficult because their objective is to public shame people. Our objective is to arrest, charge, and successfully prosecute and obtain convictions in all of these files.
The RCMP says it is also conducting an internal code of conduct investigation against the officer arrested and says if the allegations against him are substantiated, it will be taking immediate steps to separate the individual from the force. Stephanie Mercier, CBC News, Vancouver.
Millions of dollars in undeclared cash has been seized from Chinese travelers at Vancouver International Airport in recent years. This is according to documents released by the Canada Border Services Agency. In the last 3 years, more than $13 million have been confiscated. That's a jump of more than 50% each year. Any amount over $10,000 must be declared at the border. The increase in undeclared cash is raising concern over the source of the money. Some officials suspect it's related to money laundering, fraud, and other corrupt activities in China. The approval process for the Energy East pipeline could be going back to square one. Board panel reviewing the project stepped down late yesterday over a meeting with former Quebec Premier Jean Charest. He was working as a paid lobbyist for pipeline builder TransCanada. And as Evan Dyer reports, it's not clear what will happen next.
Justin Trudeau has long said pipeline projects need what he calls social license.